All right. Well, we want to tell you about how Canada is not getting access to certain news websites because Google now is blocking certain news that Canada doesn't like. The Canadian government last year introduced the Online News Act. This was in the wake of the trucker protest introduced by Justin Trudeau's Liberal government. And it is a way for Canada to downrank and declassify news organizations if they don't like it. And now Google is saying, well, okay, we'll test out doing this, which is interesting that Google would do this, and they admitted to it. A Google spokesperson emailed Reuters and said, we're briefly testing potential product responses to Bill C-18 that impacts a very small percentage of Canadian users. We run thousands of tests each year to assess any potential changes to search. Except the bill hasn't passed yet. If you look at the Parliament of Canada website, you can see that it is still being debated in the Senate. So why would Google need to turn off access for Canadians for such a controversial bill that amounts to censorship and the shutting down of a free press? Google says it's only conducting limited tests, only for 4% of the Canadian population, to limit the visibility of Canadian and international news to varying degrees. Lots of questions about that. But we remind you that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau continues to be antagonistic about who he considers is press, who is legitimate. So this is Google following right in line with him, not wanting some sites to be ranked as news if he doesn't like them. Here he was last year slamming Rebel News, telling them exactly what kind of disdain he had for any anti-government dissent.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the Press Gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Oh, he sure told her. Now, here she is saying that the government is not allowed to decide what is news and what is not, but that is what C-18 tries to do. It seeks to give the Canadian government the power to license news organizations and then deplatform the ones that they don't like. Here's just sort of a summary of it, and I highlighted the more. That's a terrible screen. I shouldn't do that anymore. I'm sorry. That's teeny tiny writing, and I just sort of highlighted the things that I find to be the most disturbing. I guess you could pause that and zoom in, or I could send it to you. Clayton's going to yell at me later and be like, what are you trying to do there?
We need to have a discussion about your screenshots here. I don't understand what the hell.
This is me like, that's a problem, that's a problem. And then I was going to zoom in on all of them, and I was like, no, people will get bored. I'm sorry.
Shift Command 5.
Yes. I know, but so, okay.
And she used to be a tech journalist.
It's not that I don't know how to do it. It's that I just start to get like in the weeds weeds with this information, and then I don't want to bore you, but I want to engage you. Okay, I will take that to
zooming out
heart.
on an entire microfiche zooming out on an entire microfiche of like of a newspaper and be like, if you look at the article on page 5.
I know. I never was able to work those microfiche. Like I'd try to zoom in on something and then I'd all of a sudden be like taken back to the beginning. Anyway, okay, I take the criticism that I just gave myself. Now, the C-18, it gives the government the power to negotiate who is and who is not a news organization, and then it establishes a code of conduct for those who do not to get to be established as news, and that the Prime Minister won't call a news organization. They would be blocked by ISPs and search engines. It would also fine anyone for violating the codes of conduct established by the government, which is not what you would call a free press. But my problem with this is that it seems that the government has already handed over a list of who they would disqualify, because otherwise, how would Google know who to block?
Right. Well, we are already seeing it today, right? Because we have a number of viewers who are telling us this afternoon that, in fact, they can't find our show, that they weren't able to find our show, that even just doing a simple search on YouTube, they weren't able to find it in Canada. By just searching for redacted news or redacted, they can't find the show. And can we please provide them with a link? And so we've heard from a couple of Canadian viewers today on that very issue.
Right, which is why we put our live show in the newsletter the next day. But then also, even if it's not blocked or deplatformed as news, this one viewer wrote us and said, it seems like if I use my VPN, I can finally load it. It takes several minutes. So it's possible that ISPs can also throttle, which does make a big difference in what information gets through or not. What's this list? Has the Canadian government already handed it over, or has Google come up with it on their own? Why would they test this? There's a lot of questions, and it seems like I can only come up with nefarious reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly troubling. And then, of course, Justin Trudeau had lectured all of us about how there's slippage, right? That there's slippage, as he described, there's slippage happening about democracies around the world. And you start to see this slippery slope, as he described it, with taking away freedoms. And he was specifically talking about Putin, and he was in support of Ukraine. Ukraine, the most corrupt government in Europe, which has clamped down on personal freedoms, taken away free press and taken state control of that, clamped down on religions, right? All sorts of things. And he was lecturing us about democracy. And he, in his own government, doing the very thing that he's lecturing the rest of us about.
Yeah. So this is interesting. If you are in Canada and you have experienced, maybe you're one of this 4% that are not able to call up certain news organizations, I'd love to hear what they are in addition to ours. And I would just love to hear more about how Google just took it upon itself to censor news, even though that is currently not the law yet in Canada.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Like, hey, we know it's coming down the pike. We just want to get these tests in and start censoring the news that we don't like.
Let's see how that's going to work. That will be fun. It works.
Independent media, I'm sure Rebel News as well, and Redacted, and Russell Brand, and whoever else they want to block up there in Canada, so that they're getting state-run media. Really, really sad. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.